Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you for another Film Fanatic show. It is about 9:23. It is a Tuesday. Another beautiful day. We've had some really nice weather. Temperatures have dropped off quite a bit. Yesterday was pretty hot actually. It was in the high 70s, almost the 80s, so it was actually pretty hot. But very nice day, and then today is looking like it's going to be pretty nice too. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Tuesday. So, as continuing with these newer shows, I have been really digging and I've been really enjoying doing these like specialty shows where I've been doing some coverage of directors and of films that I just recently saw in the theater. I've said before, it used to be a regular thing for me back quite a few years ago to go to the movies all the time. I used to go at one point. It's hard to believe, but I used to go almost every weekend. And I've talked about that before. Years ago, I had a little circle of friends that were really into movies also, and I used to stay up on everything that was coming out. I like a lot of the stuff I love now, but my head was in the space of more around like contemporary films and things that were coming out. I had a lot of different habits around films back then. I would say overall I'm obviously more into films now than ever, but the landscape has changed so much and my habits have changed quite a bit. I don't think I've necessarily changed like my view around films. Or the one thing that is different is I have really stepped into the area of being a real big collector. But that being said, even back then I used to buy DVDs all the time. It hasn't really changed. That during that time I was going to Bull Moose. I mean, this is going back 10 years ago, or even more. It's kind of crazy. I was, out of school. I had just graduated college, and there was a period of where 2 years I was working, or 2 years after I got out of college, I started working at this restaurant, and then I started to get to know these guys that were, all about the same stuff I was into. And everybody now in that group has like moved away or has kids, and things have changed. I've keep in touch with some of those guys, but it's just life brings people in different directions. But I was like, in my late 20s, early 30s, and we all had a lot of the same interest in certain bands and music and all those kinds of things. But I would religiously check the Free Press, which is a local paper that actually still exists. I would read they would do these movie reviews on new things that were coming out, and I would stay up on all of that. And then I would also check the listings. It was back when Colonial Theater was a real thriving theater. The Colonial Theater was a big thing happening in Belfast. Used to go there all the time. So, and I actually had subscriptions to Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly. I used to buy all of the movie magazines back when magazines still existed. They still do, but it's so weird. They don't they're hard to find. The only place that I know that you can go and actually have that experience of going into like a magazine rack or seeing a magazine rack is Borders up in Augusta, which is I haven't been up there in a while, but the last couple times I've been up there, which wasn't that long ago, they still had these giant rows of magazines, and that's the only place, as far as I know, that you can go to buy publications about music, art, or whatever. And but back then they were everywhere. So now, like they have tiny little sections where occasionally where there's like this little section, like even in Hannaford. Hannaford used to have a big magazine section. Now it's like this tiny little thing. And some places don't have them at all. Like Walgreens even had a big section, and back then it was Rite Aid. They used to have this massive book section, magazine section. But I used to, stay up on all that stuff, and I used to go all the time. And so it's really funny. And I realized when I was doing these shows, I just recently did a show, or about three different shows on movies that I saw in the theater, and that was Oppenheimer. I also saw The Last Voyage of the Demeter, and then I just saw Jaws in the theater, and then I realized, wow, okay, I've actually been to the movies quite a bit in the last few weeks, so that's pretty cool. So there's a couple other things I'm looking into maybe going to see. I've been going. Just recently discovered this new theater, or new for me, but there's a flagship cinema in Waterville that I've gone to a couple times, and I really really like that theater. It's a little bit of a drag because it's an hour away, but it's kind of worth it. And I went there. The two newer movies I just saw, Oppenheimer and The Last Voyage of the Demeter, I went there to see those films. The only movie theater that's really close, which isn't really that close really when you think about it, but it's still the most convenient theater, is Flagship Cinema in Thomaston. And Thomaston is about an hour away from here, but the theater is right in the on the Rockland Thomaston border, so it's about 35-40 minutes from here. So that's the closest theater, and that's by car. I haven't. I've been going there, but it's been a while. It's definitely been a while since I've been there. But I don't know. I've been going to the movies a little bit more. But again, it's that thing of where I don't think it's changed for me as far as like me being more picky. I had a couple of friends that were always, just for a while now have been like fatigued and just complaining about the quality of movies, the quality of some of the movies that are coming out. And so they hadn't, they just kind of stopped going, or when they would go, it was very sporadic, but they're very cynical, just saying that nothing is really that exciting, and it's kind of all of these rehashed ideas, or they're not very good, or they're just like very mediocre and bland. And I was, kind of defending movies that were coming out at the time. I would always play the card of, well, I think there's really good movies, and there's, you know, this and that coming out, and make recommendations. And over time, I kind of arrived at really sharing your viewpoint. And I've just been really kind of bummed out and let down by the movies that have been coming out, and movies that I just find myself, as a huge fan of movies, just been really surprised how I've been reacting towards all of the things that have been coming out, which has been, tons of movies, but they have mostly been superhero movies for the most part. Literally every other week. Just this past week, the Blue Beetle just came out. I've heard it's pretty good, but I'll probably see it on DVD. I don't really have a desire to see it. So during this whole period, I've been buying lots of Blu-rays and DVDs, and my collection has been really growing. But I've been essentially watching a lot of older films, and today's show is no exception. Today is about this movie that I have been hearing about for so long, and I've never seen it before. I've heard about it for a long time. It's one. It's one. It's a film by one of my favorite directors of all time. That is Dario Argento. Dario Argento is probably I think for casual and then people who consider themselves to be big time fans of the genre, he is the most popular Italian director in the world of horror. I would say, and the reason is because of like you take a movie like Suspiria. That is a movie that I have found that people who have not like necessarily explored the horror exploitation world, the Giallo world, all of the movies that came out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, more, especially from Europe and especially from Italy, where you have, thousands of different directors turning out during those decades, churning out all kinds of great sleazy exploitation movies. And Dario Argento was one of the key figures in the world of Italian cinema and still is. And a lot of like I've seen that happen where I've seen lots of reviews on people by YouTube people, YouTube guys and girls who are like quote unquote horror fans and they talk about say their favorite horror movies or they tend to stay on more focused on more contemporary horror films, which some of them I really really love, but then they'll talk about say their favorite slasher movies, and the movies they always bring up are the Nightmare on Elm Street films or Friday 13th, and the original or the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise for that matter. And I love those films to death. I love those. Friday the 13th is my favorite franchise. But when it comes to say movies that are even older or Italian cinema, they always bring up Suspiria and Dario Argento. They don't seem to really take a deep dive into those glorious decades that preceded Nightmare on Elm Street, and the Friday 13th franchise, pre 80s. But Dario Argento's popularity, just I think alone on Suspiria, which is a complete and utter masterpiece of horror. That movie is definitely the biggest like Italian movie I think of all time as far as horror movies go. And that really put him on the map. And so like people who have no idea or clue about Italian cinema or European cinema, they all know who Dario Argento is, just alone from that movie. And there's a movie that, and again, Dario Argento is one of my favorite directors. He is, just incredible in a world, during a decade or decades where there were so many incredible directors. Sergio Martino, Lucio Fulci, who is my favorite Italian director. The list is endless. I mean, just so many amazing directors. But the movie I'd been wanting to see for so long, I was so excited to find it, and for at a really good price, is Dario Argento's Tenebrae. I like again. I've been hearing about this movie for quite some time, and I've never seen it before. I never even heard of it, and it came out in 1987, and oh my God, this movie is such a masterpiece. Like, unlike anything I've seen in recent time. I got this incredible Blu-ray edition that has. I'm in the middle of watching it now, but there's this amazing documentary on the history of Giallo films, and this film is definitely a Giallo masterpiece. But I also feel it's like a slasher movie, or it is a slasher movie. It's definitely a horror. It's got amazing horror elements. It's definitely a Giallo though, and I've talked a lot about Giallo films. Giallo is, Giallo, the Giallo style of filmmaking is something I've always been aware of. I've seen a lot of those films, growing up as a kid, but I never knew what that term was. I never really paid attention to it. probably didn't really care, especially when I was younger. I didn't really think of it as, a style. I remember as a kid seeing a lot of a lot of the Italian horror movies, Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento films, and various other ones like during the days of VHS. And I just always thought that they were, these really gritty, sleazy kind of horror movies. I never really thought of stylistically what what's behind it or what it could be called. And it's Italy. Italy has just such a fascinating history when it comes to cinema. I mean, they know how to make films. The Italians know how to make movies, and they have some really unique styles to that have really changed and helped shape and create, and for that matter, they've also created their own kind of patented genres, their own like 2 degree subgenres, or their own completely unique styles. You have like the giallo and the spaghetti western, and then you have like the horror exploitation movies. Very unique, very distinct, and this is all attributed to the Italians. And the giallo is such a unique art form because it was a style that kind of originated in Italy in like the late 50s. There's another director who is just an amazing director, Mario Bava, who is credited with being kind of the first director in Italy to create this new style called the giallo. And giallo is basically, you know, uh, a murder mystery story. It's very much inspired by it's like their version of Agatha Christie, like a murder mystery movie of where they're and Giallo has these very specific kind of characteristics which make the style very unique, where there's always some kind of murder mystery involved. There's a series of these murders that are happening, and then there's always a an element of where there's some kind of investigation behind these murders, and then there's the giallo style always has like this heightened reality where it's set in reality. A lot of the stories are set in reality or like in a contemporary kind of framework, but everything is really heightened, and it has this very surrealistic quality, and everything is very much over the top. They giallos Giallos typically have a real heavy duty, violent, and sexual content where the sex is pretty much over the top. And the violence is usually very much a big part of it. It has elements of that are taken from film noir, where there is not really any characters who is so easily to define as like say the good guy or the bad guy. That is directly taken from film noir, which was a style, an American style that kind of started in the 30s and 40s in America. Kind of the idea of the anti-hero. Um, and there's always, and a lot of the giallo style was very much taken from a huge influence from the master of suspense himself, Alfred Hitchcock. So you have all of those kind of distinct styles and flavors, and it's very unique. And it definitely has, and the other characteristics that you typically see is probably the biggest one is the gloved killer. There's in virtually every giallo film there's always a scene of where the killer in the movie is slashing away and killing people, but there's always scenes of where he's wearing these gloves. That's another typical characteristic. And a lot of giallo films they have this very sleazy element. There's also, like I said, with the sexual content and the violence. There's always a psychosexual element to a lot of the times. Very very distinct, very unique, and Tenebrae is just astonishing. It is This movie is a masterpiece. Like, I've never seen it before, and again, I was super excited. I just watched it last night, and wow, this movie is just amazing. And it's centered on the story is very cool. Like, the story is centered on this guy who publishes this book that's called Tenebrae, and it's about this psychopath essentially. And then when this book is published, he is being targeted by someone he believes is a real life serial killer, and he is making all of these women are getting picked off one by one, and there's he's getting phone calls and messages from this guy or girl who is supposedly this killer, and he's always referencing the book Tenebrae, and he's kind of modeling his his mode of operation off of the book, and it's so good. It's just the kills, and I definitely think this movie has a big time slasher element because of the kills. This movie is super violent, and it's super gory. There's some scenes in this where the blood is spraying, and the blood is a big part of it, and it's very satisfying. Amazing. In this transfer of this film on Blu-ray is pretty astonishing. And like I said, there's an amazing, which I'm like halfway through, but there's an amazing documentary on here about the history of Giallo, which is about an hour and a half, and it's incredible. Um, Definitely one of the best Giallo films I've ever seen, and definitely one of my favorite new films I just recently bought. I can't wait to watch this again. And again, it's got all those classic, kind of characteristics of how what I mentioned a few seconds ago of what kind of like makes up a Giallo film. It's it's got it's got so many of those elements of it's a murder mystery. It's pretty sleazy. It's super graphic. It's very dark. It's got this real heightened kind of surrealistic reality. Very mysterious. There's a lot of sequences in it where there where they're essentially like dream sequences, and so there's times during in the narrative of the story where you're not quite sure if these events are actually happening or not. That's kind of another characteristic of the Giallo. But my God, just so good. I think this movie would be, I think people who say are just fans of Hitchcock, who might not have really been exposed to this style, would really dig this movie because it has such a Hitchcock influence, and like it has that film noir vibe to it. But it's incredibly suspenseful. The ending is just amazing. It's one of the best payoffs. And again, it's like right up until the end, I was like, holy fuck. I had no idea that. I didn't see that coming. It's very. It's such a great suspense caper of a film. And the transfer of this on Blu-ray is just unbelievable. I mean, it's immaculate. And it's one of my it's now officially one of my favorite Dario Argento movies. And again, it's a movie I've been hearing about. I saw it when I went to Bull Moose, which was which was last week. Yeah, a week ago, which is hard to believe. I came across this and I was super excited because like again, the last few years I've been hearing about this movie for so long, and a couple of guys that I like on YouTube have talked about this film being just such a masterpiece, and I'd never seen it before, and I love Dario Argento. I did a show on. I did a couple of reviews on some of his movies. I did a big show on Suspiria, which is, what else can be said about that masterpiece. I finally bought that on Blu-ray, and I also bought Inferno, which is another amazing movie by his. And I think I've done a few other ones, but just incredible. Dario Argento's still going. I mean, his more recent films, they are what they are, but his prime time, his golden period as a director, it's definitely in the decades of the '70s and the '80s. Just amazing. Just one classic after another. And Tenebrae is, uh, you know, without exception, this movie is so freaking good. I went into this movie totally cold too, which was great because I haven't. I knew it was like kind of a horror movie. I knew it was a giallo film, but I didn't know anything about what what the story was. I didn't know anything about it, so I never read anything about it. So I went into watching it totally cold. Bought it, got a really for I bought it for a really great price, and I was so blown away by it. It had many moments to where I was sitting watching it on my couch, and I was like, "What the fuck? Holy shit! I didn't expect that at all." It's got so many great twists and turns around the character, and who, when they do reveal who the killer is, it's astounding. The cast is just incredible for this film. Um, just incredible. Dania, Daria Nicoli, Anthony Francisco, John Saxton, or John Saxon is in this movie. It's an American. I mean, I should say it's a definitely an Italian film, but it has a lot of American actors in it. John Saxon. Like again, one of the things I like to try to do, which is an awesome feature for a lot of these foreign movies, is that you can watch these films in their original native language with English subtitles. And I've always said too, like when you have an option to watch a foreign film and there are subtitles, and you have the option to watch it in the English with English subtitles, it's way better than watching a dubbed version of the film. There's something to be said about watching, a good old sleazy movie that's dubbed. There's a certain kind of charm to it, and a certain cool factor to it. But I find, particularly just even in foreign films in general, I have found that if you watch a movie that is technically a foreign film and you watch it in a dub version, and you compare, say, that experience to watching it in its native language with subtitles, I have found through experience that the narrative is very different. There can be big discrepancies in the story, and you're not really getting a full vision of what the movie is about. Things get lost in translation. It's really weird. This movie came with subtitles, but it's all shot in English, so you couldn't really get, because it's mostly an American film for the most part with an American cast, especially with John Saxon being in the lead role. But the story is just so tight and so fantastic. Yeah, and the music is just incredible. Um, yeah, can't recommend this movie enough. I should say too. I said 1987. This actually came out. It came out in 1982. Interesting. It came out in 1982 in Italy. and then it was released in the U.S. in '87. Huh, interesting. But amazing, amazing movie. Um, it's a masterpiece. I can't recommend this movie enough. So this is Jason Dean. Thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.